The room was silent, except for the low hum of machines. A small group of scientists stood in front of a glowing screen, watching something that did not make sense. They had run this experiment many times before, and yet every time, the result felt new and unsettling. On the screen, tiny particles moved through space. When no one was watching closely, the particles behaved like waves, spreading out, existing in many places at once. But the moment the scientists turned on the detector, the moment they chose to observe, everything changed. The particles suddenly acted like solid objects. They picked a single path, as if reality itself had made a decision. The scientists looked at one another, unsure of what to say. They had not touched the particles. They had not pushed or moved anything. They had only looked, and yet, reality had responded. For centuries, humans believed the universe was solid, fixed, and independent. Stars burned whether anyone saw them or not. Mountains stood tall without needing attention. Reality existed on its own, or so it seemed. But this experiment whispered a different story. It suggested that at the deepest level of nature, the act of observation mattered. Not later, not indirectly, but instantly. One scientist leaned closer to the screen, his face pale. If this is correct, he thought, then reality is not what we thought it was. The idea was disturbing. If particles change behavior when observed, then what does observation really mean? Is it measurement? Is it awareness? Or is it something deeper that science does not yet have words for? The experiment was repeated again and again. Different labs, different countries, different equipment. The results stayed the same. Reality behaved one way when unseen, and another way when observed. The universe, it seemed, was paying attention. Outside the laboratory, the world looked normal. Cars passed by. People talked. Phones buzzed with messages. No one suspected that beneath all of it, reality might be uncertain, fluid, unfinished. The narrator's voice gently asks the audience to imagine this. What if the world around them is not fully formed until it is noticed? What if reality is waiting, quietly, for observation to decide what becomes real? This was not philosophy or religion. This was science, tested and measured, and that made it even more unsettling. Some scientists tried to explain it away. They said the measuring tools interfered with the particles. They said no mystery existed, only technical limitations. But deeper experiments challenged those explanations, even when the measurement was delayed, even when the choice to observe happened after the particle had already moved. Reality still adjusted. As if time itself bent to observation, the room grew heavier with questions. If observation shapes behavior at the smallest level, then where does that stop? Does it end with particles, or does it reach into atoms, molecules, living cells? And then came the most dangerous question of all. If observation matters, does the observer matter too? The narrator pauses, letting the weight of that idea settle. Every human being observes the world constantly. Every thought, every focus, every moment of attention. Could it be that humans are not just watching reality, but quietly participating in it? The scientists did not have answers. They only had evidence. And the evidence suggested something strange, something almost unbelievable. Reality, at its core, may not be passive. It may respond. It may change. It may blink when someone looks. And as the screen in the laboratory continued to glow, one truth became impossible to ignore. The universe might not be a silent stage. It might be listening. At first, the scientists tried to stay calm. Science had faced strange results before, and most mysteries eventually found simple answers. They believed this would be the same. They told themselves the particles were not strange, only the tools were. Maybe the machines disturbed the particles. Maybe the act of measuring physically changed their behavior, so they designed better experiments, more careful ones. Experiments where the particles could not be touched, pushed, or influenced in any obvious way. They created a setup where particles were fired one by one toward a barrier with two small openings. If the particles were solid, they should pass through one opening or the other. If they were waves, they should spread out and pass through both. When no one watched which opening the particle used, a wave pattern appeared on the screen, as if each particle traveled every possible path at once. But when detectors were placed to observe the path, the wave pattern vanished. The particles behaved like tiny bullets, choosing only one route. The scientists stared at the results in disbelief. The same particle, the same setup, the same conditions. Only one thing had changed: observation. This was the moment science met something it could not easily explain. The universe seemed to behave differently depending on whether it was being watched. Some scientists laughed nervously, others grew quiet. A few felt a deep sense of unease. They had been trained to believe the universe was objective, that reality existed, fully formed, independent of human awareness. But these experiments challenged that belief at its core. To avoid panic, new explanations were proposed. Perhaps the detector disturbed the particle with energy. Perhaps information itself caused the change, not observation. Perhaps consciousness had nothing to do with it at all. But the experiments continued. And with each new version, the mystery deepened. In one version, the decision to observe was delayed. The particle had already passed through the openings before. The observer chose to measure. Logic said the outcome should already be fixed. Yet the results still changed, as if reality waited for the decision, as if the future reached back into the past. Time itself seemed confused. The scientists now faced an uncomfortable truth. The universe did not behave like a simple machine. It behaved more like a question waiting for an answer. Some researchers tried to ignore the deeper meaning. They focused only on predictions and equations. If it works, they said. Why? Ask why. But others could not stop thinking. What does it mean if reality depends on observation? What does it mean if nature hides possibilities until someone looks? The narrator gently pulls the audience closer. This was not just a strange experiment. It was a crack in the foundation of how humans understood existence. If reality changes when observed, then certainty becomes fragile. Then the universe is not fully written until interaction occurs. The scientists realized they were no longer just studying particles. They were studying the relationship between knowledge and existence. And somewhere between the equations and the glowing screens, a frightening idea began to form. Maybe science had discovered something ancient, something philosophers had wondered about for thousands of years, that the observer and the observed are not fully separate. The laboratory lights stayed on late into the night. Data continued to fill the screens, and the mystery refused to disappear. Science had opened a door it did not know how to close, and behind it waited a question that would not stay silent. If reality reacts to observation, then what role does the observer truly play? And more importantly, who or what is really watching? As the experiments continued, the focus slowly shifted. The particles were no longer the most troubling part. The observer was. Scientists began to ask a quiet but dangerous question. What exactly counts as observation? Was it the machine that measured the particle? Was it the data stored on a computer? Or was it the moment a human mind became aware of the result? At first, many believed machines were enough. A detector clicks, a signal appears, a number is recorded. Surely that should count as observation. But the universe did not make things so simple. Some experiments showed that particles behaved strangely until the information was actually known. The data could exist, untouched, unseen, and only when someone looked at it did reality seem to settle. This made the scientists uncomfortable. They were used to tools and numbers, not awareness, not consciousness. Philosophers were invited into the conversation, and they brought questions science was not prepared to answer. They asked whether the universe exists as a fixed object, or as a field of possibilities waiting for experience. They asked whether observation is an action, or a relationship. The narrator describes the growing tension. Physics wanted equations, philosophy wanted meaning. Some physicists argued that consciousness had nothing to do with it. They said the universe does not care about minds, only interactions and information. Others were not so sure. They pointed out something strange. The universe behaves as if it knows when information becomes meaningful, and meaning requires a mind. The idea felt dangerous. If consciousness plays a role in shaping reality, then humans are not outside the universe, looking in. They are inside it, participating. The observer was no longer a neutral witness. The observer became part of the experiment. The narrator gently shifts the focus to the audience. Every day, people observe without thinking. They look, judge, expect, assume. They notice some things and ignore others. They focused attention in one direction and not another. Could this simple act of attention be more powerful than it seems? In the lab, scientists argued late into the night. Some warned against mixing science with consciousness. They feared losing objectivity. They feared stepping into mystery. but the data refused to obey comfort. The results kept pointing to the same unsettling truth. Observation is not passive. Something happens when reality is noticed. The universe did not appear to exist as a single outcome. It appeared as many possible versions at once. An observation selected one, like a question choosing an answer, like a story choosing a path. This raised another troubling thought. If observation selects reality, then different observers might experience different versions, not different facts, but different realities shaped by focus, belief, and expectation. The narrator pauses, allowing the idea to breathe. Humans do not just see the world, they filter it, they frame it, they shape it through attention. The laboratory experiments and the human experience began to mirror each other. Both suggested the same quiet message. Reality is not simply out there. It emerges through relationship. The scientists realized they had crossed a line. They were no longer asking how particles move. They were asking how existence itself appears. And, in that moment, a deeper mystery revealed itself. If the observer plays a role in reality, then the universe may be incomplete without observation. The observer was not an outsider. The observer was part of the system, and once that idea entered science, it could never be unseen. As the debate deepened, a new idea slowly took shape. What if reality is not finished until it is observed? For a long time, people believed the universe was like a solid book, every page already written, every event fixed from the beginning. But the experiments suggested something very different. Reality looked more like a draft, full of possibilities, waiting for something to choose one. Scientists began to describe the universe as a field of chances, not one outcome, but many existing at the same time. At the smallest level, particles. He did not choose a single state. They hovered between options, like a coin spinning in the air. Only when observation entered did the coin fall. Only then did reality take a definite shape. This idea felt unsettling. If the universe is still forming, then certainty is an illusion. The narrator invites the audience to imagine everyday life. A person walks into a room. Their attention moves from one object to another. What they focus on becomes clear. What they ignore fades into the background. Reality feels stable, but experience is shaped by attention. Some scientists noticed the similarity, the way particles behave, the way human awareness works. Both seem to involve selection. Both turn possibility into experience. Philosophers returned to ancient questions. They spoke of reality as something becoming, not something already complete. They suggested the universe is more like a conversation than a machine, a process unfolding through interaction. This idea challenged comfort. A fixed universe feels safe. A forming universe feels alive, but uncertain. If reality is still forming, then the present moment matters deeply. Observation becomes an act, not just a record. The narrator lowers the voice. What if each moment of awareness helps shape what comes next? In physics, equations described probabilities, not certainties. The math itself seemed to accept uncertainty as fundamental. This was not human ignorance. This was built into reality. Some scientists resisted this conclusion. They wanted the universe to be finished, independent, unchanged by observation. But the data did not support comfort. It supported possibility. The idea slowly spread beyond physics, into philosophy, into questions about free will and choice. If reality is not fixed, then the future may not be fully decided. The narrator pauses again, allowing the weight of this thought to settle. A forming universe suggests participation. It suggests responsibility. Reality may not just happen to observers, it may happen with them. The line between observer and world continued to blur. The universe no longer looked like a stage. It looked like a process unfolding moment by moment, and as this idea took hold, another question quietly emerged. If reality is still forming at the smallest level, what does that mean for the human mind? And how deep does this connection truly go? As the story moved forward, the focus slowly turned inward. The experiments were no longer only about particles and screens, they were about people. Scientists began to wonder if the human mind had always been part of the equation, not as a mistake, but as a feature. Every experiment involved choice. What to measure, when to measure, what to ignore. These decisions shaped the outcome, not by force, but by attention. The narrator reminds the audience that humans never observe the world without filters. They bring beliefs, expectations, and assumptions, even in the most careful science, showing how attention changes perception. how expectation influences what people notice. Two people could witness the same event and remember it differently. The mind does not record reality like a camera. It interprets, it selects, it completes patterns. Then, objectivity becomes fragile, but others saw opportunity, a chance to understand reality more deeply, not as separate from the observer, but connected. The narrator draws a subtle line between the laboratory and daily life. Every day, people observe their own lives. They focus on problems or possibilities, on fear or hope. What they attend to grows stronger in experience. What they ignore slowly disappears. This does not mean thoughts magically control the universe, but it suggests attention plays a role in shaping meaning and outcome. Ancient philosophies quietly return, long before modern science. They spoke of awareness as central to existence. Now, science was brushing against the same idea, from a very different direction. The human mind no longer looked like an outsider. It looked like an interface between possibility and experience. The narrator lowers the tone. If the mind helps select reality at the smallest level, then personal experience may be part of a much larger pattern. This realization felt both empowering and unsettling. Empowering because choice matters, unsettling because responsibility follows. The scientists did not claim humans control reality, but they could no longer say humans are irrelevant to it. The universe appeared less like an object and more like a relationship between the world and the one observing it. As this idea settled, the final question began to form. If observation matters and consciousness plays a role, then what kind of reality are humans helping? The scientists did not find a final answer. They found a question that refused to fade. The experiments continued. The equations grew more precise, but the mystery remained. Reality still behaved differently when observed. Possibilities still collapsed into experience, and certainty remained just out of reach. The universe no longer looked like a finished object. It looked like something responding, something unfolding through interaction. The narrator invites the audience to step back, to look at their own lives through this strange lens. Every moment of awareness feels ordinary, yet it may be quietly powerful. Each choice of attention highlights one path and not another. Each focus turns possibility into experience. This does not mean humans control the universe, but it suggests they participate in it. The scientists accepted something important. Not everything meaningful can be reduced to certainty. Uncertainty was not a flaw, it was a feature of reality. Philosophy. The narrator's voice softens. If observation matters, then how we observe matters too. Do we look with fear or curiosity, with judgment or openness? The universe may not answer these questions directly, but it responds in subtle ways. Reality, once seen as cold and distant, now feels intimate, connected. The observer is no longer separate from the world. They are part of the story unfolding. The scientists returned home each night, carrying the same thoughts as everyone else, about choice, meaning, and direction. The lab lights eventually turned off. The screens went dark, but the questions stayed awake. If reality responds to observation, then what kind of world emerges from human attention? And more importantly, what kind of observer will each person choose to be? The story does not end with certainty, it ends with awareness. Because perhaps the greatest discovery was not about particles, but about participation. Reality may not just exist, it may be listening, and in every moment of attention, it may be quietly responding.